Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Your Excellency, the Chair of the Senate, the Honorable, the Attorney General in absentia, the Speaker of the House of Representatives in absentia, the Chair of the House Committee, Senators, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be invited to join you today to speak about the subject of corruption. It is a subject that is evergreen in Africa and one that deserves attention at all times because corruption has undermined and continues to undermine development in Africa. It is true that corruption is to be found in every society, but the reason why corruption in Africa must receive greater attention is because corruption in Africa continues to be pervasive and pernicious to the detriment of the continent. Many African countries would have realized great economic and political growth, but such growth has been stunted because of corruption. Today, many of us know that the 50-odd African countries combined have a GDP that is lower than many European countries such as Germany, Spain, France, and many others. And this is so because of corruption. Talking about the impact of corruption and governance in Africa, the Liberian president with whom I agree, Johnson Sirleaf, says that Africa is poor because it is poorly governed. And those who have looked at Africa for a long time, including the famous South African who has advised Rwanda's government, Greg Mills, in his book, Why Africa is Poor and What Africa Can Do About It, have asserted that Africans are poor because their leaders have chosen that path. It therefore gladdens me that I have been invited to speak in the presence of elected leaders. It has also been said that one of the reasons why corruption thrives in Africa is because Africa is in the business of canonizing thieves and sanctifying and celebrating the wrong people while it vilifies her good men and women. It has also been argued that Africans are in the business of punishing small thieves and electing the big ones into public office. And that is why, therefore, when one is asked to speak about corruption in Africa, one must ask the question why it is that Africa has never succeeded in this fight. I can't agree more that there is a place for legislation in Africa. But those who have observed Africa have also said that the problem of the fight against corruption in Africa is not the shortage of legislation. In fact, Africa has forests of legislation which are honored in breach. Which begs the question, what is the problem? The problem in Africa is that we have succeeded, rather paradoxically, to create an environment which allows thieving and thievery to blossom and thrive. We have created an environment that ensures that our men and women who engage in graft occupy positions of power and influence. And therefore, when one is asked to ask, what is it that other African countries have done in the fight against corruption which we can emulate, one must remind oneself that there have been a number of countries in Africa which have succeeded in the fight against corruption. And the reason why they have succeeded is because the leadership in those countries have demonstrated by word and deed that they mean what they say in the fight against corruption. As I said a few minutes before, African countries are quick to sign international instruments that speak against corruption. If you look at the countries which were the first to ratify the UN Convention Against Corruption, African countries were in the forefront. If you look at the countries which were quick to adopt protocols that speak against corruption, African countries were in the forefront, and Nigeria was never far behind. If you look at the countries which adopted legislation against corruption, it is African countries. In other words, African countries have the inclination to sign anything on sight without doing what those things require and demand of them. So, it is not legislation in and of themselves. It is something else. It is the culture that we have evolved over the years in Africa of celebrating ill-gotten wealth. It is not the shortage of political pronouncements in many African countries. Those who occupy political leadership when they seek political office will invariably say that we are going to fight against corruption. But many times, in the fight against corruption, their understanding of it is that they should appear to be fighting corruption without actually fighting corruption. So the question that we must ask ourselves, what must we do, we who have the privilege and honor of serving our countries in the positions to which we have been elected, in order to salvage our countries from the chains of graft? There are those Afro-pessimists who hold the view that Africa will perpetually and eternally be mired in the muck and mire of corruption. But the truth is that African countries have demonstrated that it can be done. Countries such as Botswana have demonstrated that when there is a committed leadership at the very top, corruption can be fought and can be fought successfully. Countries such as Mauritius have demonstrated that corruption can be fought. Countries such as Rwanda have demonstrated that corruption can be fought. And what they have demonstrated is that corruption is so serious a business that it cannot be left to the political class. They have demonstrated that corruption is so serious and ill that it cannot be the fight against corruption cannot be conducted on the basis of equivocal and vague political pronouncements or technicalities of procedure. They have demonstrated that sometimes there must be a deliberate conspiracy of institutions in order to fight corruption. They have demonstrated that the executive must positively and creatively conspire with the legislature, and that the legislature must conspire with the judiciary not to undermine those institutions, but to strengthen those institutions. And I hold the view that it can be done, and it must be done. Because if it is not done, many African countries will never realize their potential. It has also been demonstrated by those countries that in order to fight corruption, there must be collaboration of a continental nature. And it is not lost on me that the African Union has brought to pass the African Convention for Combating and Preventing Corruption, which is the continental instrument that allows African countries to participate in the fight against corruption through collaboration. And it can be done through regional efforts. In the ECOWAS region, the ECOWAS environment provides an opportunity for Nigeria and the countries in this part of the world an opportunity to engage in the fight against corruption in a positive manner. It has never been lost on me that the day Nigeria rises, that is the day Africa rises.